Well, good morning, everyone. It is January the 2nd, 2026. I wanted to begin this morning by talking about the storm that we had this weekend. And we actually had some major snowfall amounts over the state of North Carolina and historic amounts in many ways. You can kind of see here on the map, there's three different areas of pink. One here between Charlotte and Greensboro, another between Myrtle Beach and Wilmington, and then finally near Beaufort and Washington and the coastal plain region of North Carolina. All three of these areas received over a foot of snowfall. And this is very historic in that it's been since 2004 since we've had a snowfall this great, really, in the Charlotte area. And you really have to go back further than that in a place like Beaufort, where it's been since 1989 since we've had a snowfall this large. So, in some cases, this storm is the largest in over 35 years for parts of North Carolina. And it's historic in another way for places like Fayetteville and Raleigh. It's hard to believe that dry slot worked in like it did, but by contrast, some places only received a couple of inches, whereas the rest of the state received much, much more. I do want to kind of go over what we saw in Southern Virginia. Places like Danville, Martinsville received over 6 inches of snow. Where you see the blue area here of 3 to 6 into Roanoke, that's not necessarily true. More like 1 to 2 inches in Roanoke was more common. But in general, a very historic storm for the area. And this cold air that was accompanying it actually went into the state of Florida. So this kind of goes into the headline I saw today over Florida. And we can see here in the southern part of the state, temperatures got into the middle 30s. So this is near the very southern border of Florida. And the iguanas there in Florida are actually dropping out of the trees. And I thought that was really interesting. It's something I really haven't thought of or heard about before. But since these are cold blooded creatures, they actually become almost stunned by the cold air and they become frozen in a sense, not able to move more or less. And because of that, invasive species, more or less, in South Florida can now be picked up and moved and transported somewhere else. And there's actually a news story here. I think it's local news channel 10 in South Florida, where they talk about these iguanas actually being transported out of the state now because of the weather that's occurred here recently. So, yeah, I'll attach that in the link below. I'll also attach the link of the snowfall totals we saw in North Carolina as well for you guys. So, what happened to that storm system we saw in the Carolinas? Well, it really didn't impact New England like what was expected a few days ago. What we actually saw was that the storm continued to affect places to the north and east of New England, places such as Nova Scotia receiving heavy snowfall, and especially over Newfoundland, the city of St. John's being highly impacted by the storm. Anywhere between 10 and 20 inches of snowfall expected in certain portions of Newfoundland. But back over the lower 48, we can see that there is a little bit of snowfall entering, let's say, the lower peninsula here in Michigan. This will be lighter amounts, mainly 1 to 2 inches of snow in general. But still, as we work further to the west over, let's say, North Dakota and Saskatchewan here in Canada, we can see some lighter snow moving into this area and even some rain showers over northern Montana, which is kind of hard to believe. But yeah, we have warmer air here in Montana, cold enough air here in North Dakota. And of course, we're seeing the snowfall move into places like Bismarck as we get into Monday morning. We'll see snowfall here, of course, but it'll be on the lighter side, maybe 1 to 2 inches in general. And as far as like heavier amounts over the west, the area that will receive some rainfall over the next day is Washington State. And over the Olympics again, we'll probably see a half an inch to maybe as much as an inch and a half of rain as the storm system moves in. But as you get into Seattle, we're talking about maybe 1/10 to a quarter of an inch of rain by contrast. Of course, the precipitation amounts pick up again as you get into the Cascades. Snowfall levels anywhere between 5 and 7,000 feet again. But in general, over the west, from Oregon down to California, along the west coast, very little in the way of rainfall and snowfall has occurred here over the past couple of weeks. And same thing is true for Nevada, into Utah, Colorado, Wyoming. All these intermountain states here have seen well below normal snowfall for the season. This ridge over the west will begin to break down with time, and there are some indications by the time we get into, let's say, the 9th, 10th, 11th of the month that, yeah, we'll see another shortwave trough begin to move into the area. And this will give us opportunities, at least, for rain and snowfall over this region. But until that time, we'll probably see some very cold air stay in place in the east. And then in the west, it will probably stay warm through that period of time as well. And probably the best place to look for changes is going to be the 500 millibar heights. So looking at the trough ridge pattern. So let's go ahead and take a look at that next. So taking a look at the trough ridge pattern on Monday morning, we can kind of outline it here. We can see the strong ridge over the west coast and the trough that's over the east. And that's been the pattern really for the last couple of weeks. Ever since the middle of January, really, we've had reinforcing shots of cold air over the east coast, and we've had strong ridging building at times over the west. And this has given us not only above average temperatures in most locations, but also very little in the way of rainfall. Any rainfall has really been confined to Washington state, maybe northern portions of Oregon, but in general, well below average in terms of precipitation. And these warmer temperatures and dry conditions will continue probably through the end of this week. But what happens as we move this forward? We can see where that trough temporarily begins to break down in the east and then get reinforced as we get towards, let's say, the middle part of the week, as we get into Thursday. Again, the ridging over the west is pretty strong even on Thursday. But I think this is a good time to kind of redraw the map here and just get a indication on where the ridge trough pattern is on Thursday. This kind of shows you how extreme it's becoming here on Thursday. And it even becomes more so on Friday. This is probably as far north as the ridge will get over the next week. And you can kind of see the difference there, reaching up into eastern portions of Alaska. But also at the same time, let's kind of clear this for a moment. There's a strong gradient between the low heights and the high heights moving from west to east here as you get into, let's say, Hudson Bay area of Canada. And what's happening here really is that we have the ridge in the west pushing to the east, but also at the same time, we have ridging over Greenland that's blocking really the path of that trough, and that's pushing in to the west, so from Greenland here. And what's happening is we're getting these extremely low heights over northern Canada. And this will begin to spill south as we get into the weekend. So you'll see this pink area begin to expand more or less as that area begins to narrow. So let's push forward in time and we'll see that pink area begin to spill to the south. And there's a couple of things to kind of point out here. Let's clear this once again. Again, this has become a very thin area of pink, extending down from Hudson Bay, right, from that polar region into New England. And you can see where that ridging over Greenland's become even stronger. The ridge over the west is now spilling over the Rockies into the Great Plains at this time. And let's kind of give you a timestamp here. This is as of 7 a.m. on Saturday morning. Meanwhile, we have this low pressure system off the coast of New England that's beginning to bomb out. An important thing to note here is the flow around the high and low pressure systems that are set up in this region. So, if you will, try to follow along here On the backside of these low pressure systems, kind of imagine the wind coming around counterclockwise. And then, of course, with the high pressure system, we have clockwise flow. And then again, the low pressure, the opposite, right? We have counterclockwise flow. And what I want you to see here is that there's this shearing pattern. There's this almost ripping apart that's occurring there over southern portions of, let's say, Canada. And you also have the pressure of the ridges, right, on either side of the trough. And what that's going to really do is rip the top part of these lower heights from the bottom. So we're going to see a separation more or less of these lower heights at the top and bottom. And we're going to have the development of a short wave at the southern end. And as we step forward, you'll notice that, yes, there is a short wave that is sheared off from the parent trough here. So, if you will, you can see how the short wave is kind of sheared off from the rest of the trough. And what that will work to do with time is actually move up here towards Greenland. And what atmospheric scientists refer to this as the breaking of a Rossby wave. And when I say Rossby wave, it's really referring to either a trough or a ridge. And they move about in this wavy like pattern. And in fact, just to kind of restate this, if you were to go back and draw along this green line here, you can kind of make out the wavy like nature of the weather that's moving west to east. And more or less where you see like the hills, right? Those are the ridges that are set up in that wavy pattern. And where you see the valleys, right? That more or less is showing the troughs in that region. And as we step forward in time, you can see how this shortwave is beginning to restore these lower heights to Greenland. And you're seeing more or less a breaking down of the ridging pattern over the country of Greenland. And you'll notice too that this pink area, these lower heights have shifted to the west. So, more so over Alaska, the northern Pacific here, northern portions of Canada, really back towards that polar circle. And what that means for us moving forward is that a lot of the cold air is going to be confined to that region. And more or less, what you hear on the media is the polar vortex is kind of constricting itself. And so, with it, the cold air. And any cold air outbreaks we receive over the Northeast will probably be fairly limited in scope. So, they won't dive as far south, and the cold air associated with them will probably be less severe. And that will likely be the trend, I would say, probably for the next week or two. So we'll probably see warmer than average temperatures over the southern plains and southeast, and a general warming trend over the Midwest and Northeast. Now, I do want to share with you that there are good sources of information here regarding the Rossby waves. One such source here is provided by NOAA on climate.gov, and it shows here the general pattern here, this wavy like feature, right, which is the jet stream itself. When we have, let's say, this ridge pattern, typically what's involved with that is a high pressure system. And when you have a trough, let's see this blue area here on the screen, that's indicative of where you might have low pressure form. And this wavy like feature continues all across the planet, basically. And where it typically sets up, the jet stream, is over the mid latitudes. Here in the lower 48, of course, between about 30 and 40 degrees north, that's where we have all of our weather typically set up. And a lot of it is due to this wavy nature here. Where these Rossby waves are really determine where we have our storm system set up in the lower 48. So the thing about Rossby waves is that they're highly dependent on the jet stream. And the jet stream does not maintain the same amplitude up or down with time. It does actually fluctuate over time. And whether we're talking about the polar vortex or stratospheric warming, whatever it may be, there are bends and breaks in the jet stream. And the Rossby wave breaking that we're talking about with this event next weekend is something that's very common. And you can often predict a Rossby wave breaking by the weird bend that sometimes occurs in the jet stream. This image here, that's provided also by NOAA, is very good here. It's showing what that shape might look like. And you can see the weird bend in the pattern here. And when that happens, that can lead to the breaking of a Rossby wave. And usually, what's associated with it is a low pressure system. The low pressure often accompanies what is now a shortwave. And that shortwave trough, depending on where it is, can deliver energy to the pole or to the equator. The one we're seeing this week is going to be delivering those lower heights back to the poles, right? Back to Greenland in this case, and start to lower those heights over Greenland. And what this is actually doing is leading to stabilization in the atmosphere. So we're returning those lower heights back to the poles, right? When this happens. And in a sense, restoring that polar vortex, right? Returning those colder temperatures back to the North Pole, right? In this case. So, this is another link I'll leave in place for you guys so you can check it out later. But very good information here. And of course, if you have any further questions about it, just leave those in the comments below. So, what do the temperatures look like first thing this week? So, on Monday morning, we basically have temperatures below 20 degrees over the mid Atlantic, parts of the Midwest, and the Northeast. We have a reinforcing shot of cold air moving into the northern Great Plains, and that will only act to bring in that cold air and stabilize that cold air through the middle of this week over much of the East Coast. Also, I think it's important to state that we have that ridging pattern over the West, and that's the reason we're seeing the 40-degree temperatures into Montana and seeing rain instead of snowfall there this morning. And as we step forward in time, we can see where the warmer air is trying to move into the south. And as we get into, let's say, Tuesday afternoon, we can see temperatures from the ridging out west, with temperatures reaching into the 60s, even in Washington state in some locations. So, very warm for this time of year along the west coast. We can see 70s and even some 80s into, let's say, southern portions of Arizona. And across the rest of the South, whether it be from Texas to southern portions of Georgia down into Florida, we do have 60-degree temperatures. The cold air is still well entrenched over the east, though, basically anywhere north of Arkansas and Tennessee into portions of the Ohio Valley. We have temperatures still below freezing at this time. But as we step this forward, we can see that there is the development of a low pressure system possible Tuesday evening over the southern Appalachians. And we could see a bit of snow on the northern side of it, let's say through northern portions of West Virginia, into Virginia, the Delmarva Peninsula, that area. And behind it, we could see colder air rushing into, let's say, places like Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. But beyond Tuesday, we can see how the cold air moves back into the Midwest. And as of Wednesday morning, we have temperatures in the single digits in spots over the Midwest into the Northeast once again. And eventually, as we get into the southeast on Thursday morning, we'll see those temperatures well below freezing once again. And perhaps even some mountain snow as we get into western parts of North Carolina. I do want to mention it at this point in the video just because temperatures will be cold enough Thursday morning to support snow there. And even over the Piedmont of North Carolina, we'll see temperatures in the 30s here Thursday morning. Again, a bit of snow could fall briefly in the Piedmont area. Meanwhile, we see temperatures in the single digits over parts of West Virginia and Pennsylvania. It just goes to show again that we have another good shot of cold air reaching the Gulf of Mexico and parts of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And beyond this point, as we get into Thursday afternoon, this shows you that the ridge is beginning to push over the Rocky Mountains. We have some downsloping winds bringing those warmer temperatures into the northern Great Plains. And we can see the 60-degree temperatures almost reaching the Canadian border here. And still, the ridge is in place over, let's say, the west coast, temperatures into the 60s and 70s along the coast there. But this is beginning to come to an end. We're going to have that short wave come in by the end of the weekend and early next week. And this may be the last weekend for you guys to experience above average temperatures along the west coast. But once again, on Thursday, we have below average temperatures. That continues for the mid Atlantic, for the Northeast. Single digit temperatures could reach Northern Virginia again. There is a warming trend along the deep south, though. We can see the 60s reaching into Oklahoma, Arkansas at this point. Temperatures are starting to cool down in the west at this point, and colder temperatures diving into the Midwest once again. It looks like this is going to be the last real deep push of cold air in the east. Again, we have single digits throughout the Great Lakes region into the Midwest. Even in the mid Atlantic, we have some single digits moving into Maryland and northern portions of Virginia. And as we get into Saturday afternoon, temperatures are staying below freezing, even in northern portions of North Carolina. The same thing is true for Tennessee. And those cold temperatures build back into Georgia here. We see sub-freezing temperatures in Atlanta, even as we get into Sunday morning. Temperatures around 5 degrees in Northern Virginia as we get into Sunday morning as well. Sub-zero temperature throughout New York State, northern Vermont. Some of the coldest air of the season for northern New York and northern Vermont there. And again, that's lining up with those really low 500 millibar heights we were looking at before. Now, beyond this point, as we get into Monday, say Monday morning, we can finally see that there's a break over the Ohio Valley in the sub-freezing temperatures. We're actually seeing temperatures in the mid to upper 30s, maybe even some lower 40s at this point. And that means as we get into Monday afternoon, over the mid Atlantic, we see some 50s and 60s moving into southeastern Virginia. Same thing is true for parts of Nebraska. It looks like the ridge is finally beginning to win out in the east. And this could be the pattern moving forward. We can see this is the 9th of February for the next couple of weeks. So maybe the 9th into the 16th of February, we could see these warmer temperatures in general. Now, it's not to say we won't have cold air outbreaks beyond this point, especially for New England, but I do think we'll see temperatures on the order of about 20 degrees warmer than what we were seeing before. And a lot of that cold air is going to be confined now to Canada versus to spilling out right over the lower 48. And let's take this just a little bit further into next Tuesday. And we can see that, yeah, we got 60s over much of the east here into Missouri, parts of Kentucky, parts of Virginia. I think this is good to point out here. We have 40-degree temperatures almost to Chicago, most of Ohio, Pennsylvania, parts of western New York. And it just shows you the extent of that warm air now moving into the region. We have above freezing temperatures even into parts of Wisconsin, southern Canada, and much of New York State, extending to the East Coast there through maybe even Boston at this point. And why that's important is we'll actually have a chance to thaw, right? We'll start to see some melting in this region as we get into Tuesday of next week. Also, meanwhile, off to the west, we can see where temperatures have begun to fall. We have, instead of 50s and 60s along the west coast, now we have temperatures in the 40s instead, all the way down to Los Angeles. What that also means is that not only will we have precipitation, but snowfall levels will likely drop. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about snowfall in the lower elevations next week when that shortwave moves on shore. And again, that could include places such as Washington State down to Northern California, where these snowfall levels really drop down to maybe 2,000 feet, right? Okay, so the next thing I want to show you here is what is forecast precipitation wise, hour by hour. And this will take us through Tuesday morning using the high resolution model. And over Michigan, you'll notice that there is light snow as we get up first thing on Monday morning. And there's also some light snow associated with a very weak low pressure system, a weak Alberta clipper, more or less, moving out of Saskatchewan and Alberta, Canada. And that's going to deliver a burst of snowfall really to North Dakota briefly on Monday morning. However, the biggest story here will be the rainfall in Washington State Monday morning. Heavy rainfall, maybe a half an inch to an inch and a half over the Olympics, somewhere between about 5 and 7 a.m. And that shifts eastward into Seattle, somewhere between about 8 and 9 a.m. for the steadiest rain. And that could drop anywhere between a tenth and a quarter inch of rain in general in Seattle. The Cascades could see 5 to 10 inches of snowfall here. Snowfall levels anywhere between about 5 and 7,000 feet during the day Monday. Now, that rainfall really comes to an end as we move forward in time. And we'll see things really dry up over the west as the ridge continues to build northward as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday. So the snowfall we were seeing over North Dakota Monday morning, I'll kind of highlight that here, will drop maybe a quick inch or two over the state of North Dakota, but they'll begin to fall apart as it heads to the south and then reform. Let's take a look at that as we step forward in time. And as we get into maybe Tuesday morning, and this is around, I guess, 9 a.m. on Tuesday, you can see the reforming of snowfall over the Ohio Valley. And there'll probably be a band of 1 to 3 inches of snowfall that sets up here, and let's say along the Ohio River, and let's say points to the east. We can also see a little bit of rainfall developing over Louisiana and southern Arkansas. Now, as we step forward in time, we're going to see the precipitation really fill in from really the mid Atlantic down to the Gulf Coast, pretty much through this entire area here. And even the development of a low pressure system over the southern Appalachians there in Southwest Virginia briefly. Yeah, we could see the potential for maybe a tenth to a quarter inch of rain for places in Tennessee down to the Gulf of Mexico, but also maybe 1 to 2 inches of snowfall on the northern end here, basically from northern Virginia back into Ohio. And then it has the potential even to throw some snow northward into New Jersey, perhaps as far north as New York City and Long Island, as we move from Tuesday night maybe into Wednesday morning. And let's kind of clear this here for a moment so you can see it. Yeah, there could be a little bit of light snow extending from southeastern Pennsylvania through much of New Jersey into New York City and even Long Island Wednesday morning. Meanwhile, to the south, we have scattered rain showers right in the Tennessee Valley, extending down to the Gulf Coast. And this is just another look at the storm system developing over the Midwest in the southern Appalachians. And this is the European model, by the way. We can see some light snow moving into Northern Virginia here briefly as we get into late Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. Rain showers further south into the Tennessee Valley and the Gulf states. And again, European models picking up on snow in the Delmarva Peninsula, southern New Jersey this time. But it looks to keep the snow below New York City. So I think it's good to keep in mind here that, yeah, we could see a little bit of light snow according to the high resolution model. But according to the European, it could be a little bit further to the south. So just keep that in mind. It looks like if you're in South Jersey, you could pick up 1 to 2 inches pretty easily. I think places to the north there, you could miss out on the snow. But again, this is not a big event by any means. And even beyond this point, we can see where there is the potential for low pressure to redevelop over Georgia, and we could get some snow on the backside, perhaps in the southern Appalachians, western part of the North Carolina, South Carolina area. And then even over the Piedmont, there could be a little bit of light snow that develops once again, at least briefly, from that low pressure system. So, what happens beyond this point? Let's say as we get towards the weekend into Friday, we see another Clipper like system moving through Michigan, through western New York, western Pennsylvania. It could be a really good burst of snow as it moves off the Great Lakes with that cold air advection. But as it goes over the higher ridges there of New York and Pennsylvania into, let's say, the Hudson Valley region or the lower elevations, let's say, of eastern Pennsylvania down towards New York City, we'll likely see some downsloping, and that will begin to lower the precipitation rates as it heads off to the east. What you'll also notice is that there could be the development of a low pressure system, let's say in the south of Maine, off the coast there of New England. We could also see some wraparound moisture there, let's say into West Virginia. The orographic lifting, we could see some enhancement there of snow. But then, yeah, we also have some wraparound moisture there and some continued snow shower activity over New England. But generally lighter amounts. The highest amounts will probably be in southern Maine if that low pressure does form, like this model is showing here. And beyond this point, again, we can see maybe another shot of snow over the Great Lakes with another weak Alberta Clipper moving over that area. What's more interesting is as we get into Sunday morning, we have a new shot of rain and snow over the northwest, but it's actually pushing into southern Oregon and northern California, something we haven't seen in several weeks now. And that will be delivering much needed rain right to that region. And as we step forward in time, We can actually see some heavy snow over southern Oregon and northern California. And this will continue into Nevada, Utah, Colorado, and much of the Intermountain West as we get into the early part of next week. And I think stepping forward, what's going to be important here is that we're going to have chances of rain and snow now for the Intermountain West and the West Coast. This is very much needed in that area. Again, this has been one of the driest winters up to this point. I think it's within the top 10 for many states out here in the West. So, one thing to keep an eye on as we get into the middle part of next week is we could have another low pressure system form over the Great Plains. And when we have a strong temperature gradient, let's say in late winter or early spring, like we have here, it could set up a severe weather outbreak. And again, this is over a week out, but it's just something to consider, especially if you live out in Tornado Alley. Well, guys, we'll leave it at that for this week. I hope you enjoyed the news story about the iguanas falling out of trees, but then also about the snowfall over North Carolina. Again, it was a very historic event. Some places haven't seen a snow like that in eastern North Carolina for over 35 years. So the big story, though, is going to be the cold air beginning to move out of the east in the coming week. And we'll begin to see warmer temperatures move into the south and the mid Atlantic and perhaps even the Midwest as we move towards the 9th, the 10th, and even the 11th of February. And just as important, really, over the West is the potential rain and snowfall that we'll get with the upcoming trough, right, moving into the West Coast. And we could see much needed rain, snow into places like Utah and Colorado, places that have seen maybe in the top 10 driest winters thus far. So hopefully, this will provide some much needed relief to that area. Of course, if you have any questions about today's video, just post those in the comments below. And of course, I have those links, right, about the Rosby wave, also about these news stories that I mentioned earlier, if you want to check those out. And of course, if you like this video, please leave a like or subscribe to this channel. I hope to have more content like this coming up. But until Thursday, have a great week, and I hope to have a video out by then.